I try to imagine a fellow smarter than myself, and then I try to think, what would he do?
Charge up your axons, ready your receptors, and shift your lobes into upper beta phase. You are listening to Smart Drug Smarts, the podcast dedicated to helping you optimize your brain with the latest breakthroughs in neuroscience, nootropics, and psychopharmacology.
Hello and welcome to the 200th episode of the Smart Drug Smarts podcast. My name is Jesse Lawler, I am your host, and this is the podcast dedicated to anything and everything that you can do to better help the workings of your own brain. And in our many scads of episodes, we have covered topics from synthetic chemicals to lucid dreams and hypnosis, dietary intervention, psychedelic compounds, physical exercise, things to avoid. The list goes on and on and on. And to do something special for the 200th episode, we were going hemming and hawing around the office. Should we do this? Should we do that? Kind of wanted to do something that would give a look back, a little bit of a retrospective, but also didn't want to have the feel of an old black and white rerun where it's just kind of the same thing with new commercials in it. And we wound up coming up with something which, who knows whether this will be done again. But what we're going to be doing today, we're breaking from the format a bit to do what we're calling the Cognito Awards, an award show for topics that are cognitively relevant. The criteria as such being that to qualify, you need to have been a past Smart Drug Smarts episode topic, and one worthy of consideration by our esteemed panel of judges. We will be taking a look back through the archives and giving out awards such as the following. Here's just a smattering of the 11 we've got planned. The Best Performance by a Natural Compound, the Stephen J. Gould Scientific Literacy Award, and the Best Use of Apes, Mice, or Fruit Flies in a Supporting Role. The cheese factor on the interstitial audio will probably be a little bit higher in this episode than in your average Smart Drug Smarts episode. Not that it's ever particularly low, but the actual meat of the content is going to be somewhat of a, best ofs picked from various past episodes. Maybe some useful reminders. If you caught those episodes in the past, you're like, oh yeah, that was a good one. I should go back and re-listen. Or if it's something you've never heard before, our ACE team of web folks have got a system on the smartdrugsmarts.com website where every episode you can go to that episode's numbers. If coming up in a while I say that was from episode number 51, you go to smartdrugsmarts.com/51, and you'll wind up being able to find that full episode. You can listen to it in all of its glory. Putting together the episode in this way, I figured would be kind of a nice way for people that are coming to Smart Drug Smarts late in the game. You don't want to go back and binge listen to every last episode, but you would kind of like to get a potpourri sampling of some of what we've done in the past. The Cognito Awards will be somewhat like a link sampler pack for some things to check out in past episodes. We are not going to be doing the ruthless listener retention gimmick in the Cognito Awards episodes, and yes, I'm saying episodes plural here because it's going to take a couple of episodes to get through all 11 awards. But we still will do This Week in Neuroscience, the normal segment, because time waits for no man. Every week there's stuff going on, and we'll kick things off that way as usual pretty much right now.
Smart Drug Smarts, This Week in Neuroscience.
So while we here at Smart Drug Smarts were looking back through the past almost 5 years of episodes, researcher John Protzko from UC Santa Barbara was looking back at 50 years of data collected in one of the most famous psychology experiments of all time. This is probably right up there with the Stanford Prison experiment, possibly more famous, certainly a lot cuter, the marshmallow test. This is that test to see how long little kids can withstand that pummeling pressure of really wanting to eat a marshmallow. There's nobody stopping them from eating it, but they know that if they just wait longer, then they'll get another one. This was first conducted by Walter Mischel back in 1968 in what became a landmark study, and since then it has been reconducted throughout the decades, including 4 studies in the 1970s, 3 in the 1990s. There was a weird break in the 1980s, but 6 times in the 2000s and a whopping 16 times in the current decade, which is maybe why we've been hearing so much about the marshmallow experiment lately. But in any event, lots of kids, lots of decades, lots of marshmallows, and lots of data. And the question that Protzko was wondering was, with the kids of today having access to iPads and commercials being shorter and flashing colors and everybody worried about the human attention span going the way of the guppy, how have kids actually fared on the marshmallow test over the course of time? Are the kids of today worse than the kids that Walter Mischel first tested back in 1968? Are they better? Are they the same? Is all this technology making a difference? We got all this data lying around. Why not take a look? And showing some strong abilities at self-control in his own right, rather than immediately running the numbers, Protzko polled 260 members of the online listserv for the Cognitive Development Society, asking how they thought the results would play out. How would kids' performance stack up to the previous decades? Possibly not surprisingly, these experts' opinions lined up pretty well with what it seems is the general public consensus that things are getting worse and not better when it comes to immediate gratification, self-control, and attention spans. And over 50% of the experts polled expected that the results would be getting worse. We'd be seeing a downtrend in the data from the 1960s up to the present. Only 16% of the experts were optimistic that things might actually be getting better, and everybody else polled thought that we would either be treading water or didn't really buy that there was enough data to show conclusively one way or the other. So we fed all the numbers into the big big bean counter, and it turns out things are actually looking quite good. This is a number kind of reminiscent of the Flynn effect, showing that IQ scores have been raising decade by decade, with the average kid's ability to delay gratification having grown by almost 1 minute per decade, from under 5 minutes in 1968 to approaching 10 minutes now. And the average of this improvement has been seen sort of in the full spread of the bell-shaped curve. Both the high achievers and the low achievers have gotten better at this test. So it's not just a case of the super restrained, monk-like kids at the high end of the range pulling up the average, says Protzko. Contrary to historical and present complaints, kids these days appear to be better than we were. A supposed modern culture of instant gratification has not stemmed the march of improvement.
Smart Drug Smarts, the podcast so smart, we have smart in our title, twice.
Picked up a couple of 5-star reviews on iTunes. Listener Patty Vitamins from the USA says, "This podcast goes above and beyond. It is a fascinating and diverse listen." And Elena from Germany says, "Perfect podcast, good content, structure, transcripts, your newsletter, etc. I am your fan." Well, thanks both to Patty and Alina and everybody else that's been dropping nice notes anywhere on the internet or in the real world. Word of mouth remains just about the best social currency there is. So if you got somebody that you think might like the Smart Drug Smarts podcast, don't be shy about telling them. Hopefully this episode and the next couple others will be a nice link to send to people, kind of a full immersion crash course on the kind of things that we cover. In case you are a first timer and you're wondering how we do what we do here, how we make this all work, we talk about a whole lot of brain related stuff, including but not limited to smart drugs and cognitive supplements. And we've got a couple of product sponsors, Axon Labs and Vitamunk, each of which can be found at their respective websites, axonlabs.io and vitamunk.com. Axon Labs is the home of a couple of stacks, Nexus and Mitogen. Nexus is an aniracetam-based cognitive stack. Aniracetam, CDP choline, phosphatidylserine, and pycnogenol. Not exactly what your mom used to make, but nevertheless quite good for you, specifically for your brain. And Vitamunk has you well covered in the brain department as well. Alpha GPC, one of their big supplements over there. They've got an ashwagandha supplement, uridine, pregnenolone, quite a few different things. A deep bench worth taking a look around their supplement lineup. And both Axon Labs and Vitamunk have subscription options in addition to one-off purchases. Save a little bit of money in addition to that always valuable time resource by signing up for those regular shipments if you are a big supplement fan, as I know many of you are. Finally, last but not least, one of those iTunes reviewers mentioned that we have a newsletter. This is true. Probably going to do a little bit of a misty-eyed retrospective in the next Brain Breakfast since we've hit the 200 episode mark. But if you're curious, you want to hear a little bit of the Smart Drug Smarts backstory, you can sign up for that at smartdrugsmarts.com/newsletter.
Smart Drug Smarts.
Okay, so in today's episode, we are going to cover our first 4 Cognito Awards. I will tell you each of those in a moment. The format's going to be like this. An announcer guy is going to tell you who the nominees are, and then you're going to hear a minute or two of audio cherry-picked from that episode. A particularly juicy piece where the guest or guests is talking about the topic that's under consideration for the award. I'll tell you what episode it was from. After all the nominees have been heard from, we will reveal the big winner. But really, needless to say, all of these past episode guests, scientists, researchers are, in fact, winners. The awards for today are the Best Public Health Warning, the Best Use of Apes, Mice, or Fruit Flies in a Supporting Role, the Stephen J. Gould Scientific Literacy Award, and the Best Overturning of the Conventional Apple Cart. Okay, strike up the band.
Ladies and gentlemen, mice and microbes, please take your seats, adjust your earbuds, and return your prefrontal cortex to its full upright position. We are excited to present for your learning and entertainment an open love letter to the human brain and the scientists who map, test, and occasionally drug it, the first ever Smart Drug Smarts Cognito Awards. And now, your host for the Cognito Awards, a man who won't drink alcohol because he's saving up to cryogenically freeze his brain, founder of the Smart Drug Smarts podcast, Jesse Lawler.
Okay, thank you. Quiet down, everybody. Could you cut the sound effect, please? Oh, okay, here we go. We'd all like to get smarter, but sometimes the best advice for those seeking greater intelligence is to just not do anything too stupid. The real world gives us ample opportunity to make choices, even choices that we might not be aware of, that aren't in our brain's best interests. Luckily, there are also real-world scientists who are working to head us off at the pass and keep our brains out of the path of avoidable dangers.
For the award for Best Public Health Warning, the first nominee is Alcohol Use Disorder by George Koob.
I think drinking with moderation is fine. The FDA has guidelines up to 2 drinks a day for males, 1 drink a day for females. There's really no untoward effects with the possible exception of a very slight 5 to 7% increase in the probability of breast cancer in females with those low doses. But other than that, most of the deleterious effects of alcohol are minimal. With my family, I don't have any trouble with people enjoying a glass of wine at dinner or a beer or, if they want to have a cocktail before a big party or something like that. I do have a problem with the phenomenon that we've been picking up on lately, young people drinking to blackout. And the legal limit for alcohol for driving is 0.08 gram %. When you drink enough alcohol to black out, you have doubled that amount. And that's literally about half of what will kill you. What I would tell family members and have told family members is know your dose effect function. Just because 2 non-steroidal analgesics will fix your headache, the whole bottle is going to give you a GI bleed. I think most Americans would not take a whole bottle. And I think we have to be aware that alcohol is a drug and can act like a drug.
And that was Dr. George Koob from episode number 172.
The second nominee is Environmental Lead Toxicity by Dr. David Bellinger.
What I worry about with lead and other sorts of exposures of this kind is that we ask the question of what factors might make a given exposure to lead more or less harmful to a child, but we don't follow that line of argument into the future and ask, are there differences in the way that a lead-exposed child and a non-lead-exposed child respond to future events in life, whether those are potentially beneficial enrichment experiences or could be other brain insults. And we don't have a lot of human evidence on this point, but we do have some animal evidence that suggests that animals, rodents that were exposed to lead early in life recover less rapidly from a later insult. So I think a lead-exposed child not only suffers the short-term adverse impacts on brain function and structure, but they're also at a disadvantage in terms of how resilient they will be when they face the inevitable later life challenges.
And that was Dr. David Bellinger from episode 156.
The third nominee is The Opiate Crisis by Dr. Ike Blom.
The amount of opioid use, both therapeutic and abusive, has gone up dramatically. Since 1999, our use of, say, just oxycodone alone has risen by 500%. And if you take a look at the opioids that are consumed worldwide, the United States are far ahead of any other country. And of course, you could make the argument that if you live in sub-Saharan Africa, maybe you simply don't have access to opioids, and that's why they don't consume opioids. But multiple other civilized countries, including Japan, France, Germany, that have access to these drugs don't consume nearly as much as the people in the United States. Another question is, why does this happen? Do we experience more painful events over here? Do we have more accidents? Do we have higher rates of cancer that require all those drug usages? And really, the answer to that is no. You're more likely to get shot in the United States, but pretty much everything else is the same.
And that was Dr. Ike Blom from episode 180.
The fourth nominee is Maternal Nutrition and Fetal Intelligence by Dr. Kavitha Menon.
Now that I'm with the public health system and a university, we are trying to develop multi-dimensional projects where it can address not only the nutrition part of it, but even the social change component and the behavior change component, so that we can improve the nutrition status of young girls by changing their behavior as well as the nutrition intake. I stress on this mainly because we have implemented a program in India for improving the adolescent health, but that is not showing enough promise. And also, we are trying to address the issues. Correcting these issues early can improve the outcome of pregnancy. Gestation is a very crucial period. It is ideal to get conceived with adequate nutrition status rather than taking supplements after that you know you are pregnant, because the development of brain is so quick. Even 22nd to 23rd day after conception, the child neural tube development is already in the process.
And that was Dr. Kavitha Menon from episode number 127.
The fifth nominee is Traumatic Brain Injury by Dr. Kathleen Bell and Dr. Martin Monti.
Sometimes people don't realize that themselves, and it takes someone else to say, that person's acting funny. People sometimes, when they've gotten a good concussion, really don't realize that they're not remembering things correctly or that they're acting in a peculiar manner. But teammates might notice, their parents might notice, someone else at the job might notice. it's that sort of feedback that sometimes is really helpful for people.
Once you have had one concussion, if you have a second one within a brief interval, the damage can be much, much greater than just having that same concussion, but not shortly after another one.
What proportion of the population do you feel like at some point in their life has a non-trivial traumatic brain injury?
That is a really great question, and it's a much harder question than you might think. We know from statistics from the Centers for Disease Control that about 2.5 million people a year in the United States are seen in a hospital or admitted to a hospital or die of a traumatic brain injury. We don't know how many people go to their doctor's offices with a concussion because the Centers for Disease Control really have statistics primarily on hospitals. So it's millions of people every year that have a brain injury.
And those were doctors Kathleen Bell and Martin Monti from episode 152.
And for Best Public Health Warning, the winner is...
The envelope, please. It is Maternal Nutrition and Fetal Intelligence by Dr. Kavitha Menon. Everyone currently alive owes a debt of gratitude to the huge numbers of animals who have made sacrifices and in some cases been sacrificed in the human pursuit of scientific knowledge. To say that these animals are uncountable in number would almost be true, except that actually the research scientists tend to count these animals quite carefully, all the while also measuring all sorts of intimate details about the animal's physiology, their behavior, and even their mood.
For the best use of apes, mice, or fruit flies in a supporting role, the first nominee is the use of rodents to research anti-inflammatory efficacy of psychedelic compounds by Dr. Charles Nichols.
We've looked at chronic and acute. I'm not going to go into the chronic too much. That's a model of psychosis. You give LSD every other day to rats, and after 3 months, they essentially go crazy. It's all in the timing. It's every other day. If we do it every day or every third day, it doesn't work. But every other day, and it's only with LSD. It's not with any of the other psychedelics. We try to pick them up. They jump. They try to bite. The normal rats, they don't really do that. They're very friendly. But they had all the similar symptoms that if you give a rat high doses of methamphetamine, it acts very similar. When we looked at the brains of those rats, we found that there was a very significant enrichment of genes that are implicated in schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So that was sort of a moderate, low, chronic, every other day for 3 months. And that's not how people normally take these medications, but it was following up on some observations that my father had made on his rats over several years. Lately, we've been looking at more of what are the effects of a single acute dose. And we've looked at DOI and LSD, and we've been treating the animals, and then 45 minutes later, dissecting out the brain, and we've figured out how to sort out the different cell types from one another. And we've identified there are about 5% of the brain neurons that are directly responding to psychedelics.
And that was Dr. Charles Nichols from episode number 196.
The second nominee is the use of mice in virtual reality environments to learn how mammal brains map space by Dr. Mayank Mehta.
So there came my so-called simple thought, what if we make virtual reality for rats? Because now in virtual reality, I can be very, very sure as to what stimulus tells a rat where he is. Smells, sounds, and textures will be there, but they will not tell him where he is in virtual space. Either the sound or the light or whatever else I put in will tell him where he is. So we thought, hey, now we'll be able to do a very clean experiment. We'll put the rat in virtual reality. It will be non-invasive. It'll be like the virtual reality used for humans so that they are seated comfortably and the virtual screen is all around them, underneath their feet. Even they see the visual scene, they are fully immersed, unlike any other virtual reality system available to humans. So we made virtual reality and we thought now we know that the only thing that tells the rat where he is are these visual cues that we put in or the auditory cues that we can put in. That's where the study began.
And that was Dr. Mayank Mehta from episode number 191.
The third nominee is the use of zebrafish to show improved memory retention from methylene blue by Dr. Francisco Gonzalez Lima.
Say I've got a tapeworm. Why wouldn't methylene blue be a positive, a benefit for the tapeworm, the same way as it conceivably would for me?
Two reasons. One, in the malaria parasite, there is an enzyme that is specifically sensitive to methylene blue. So it weakens the parasite, and then our body immune system kills the parasite. And that's specific for malaria. But for other parasites, like general intestinal parasites, when you take it orally, when it gets to intestine, it's in high concentration. And there, it promotes an antiseptic effect, just like what happens when it accumulates in the bladder. So it helps with the intestinal parasites, and any overabundant intestinal flora is reduced. Normally, if you don't have the parasite, then it will slowly be absorbed. For example, the more acidic is the environment, like in the stomach, the quicker the methylene blue gets absorbed into the circulation. So when they give it for these purposes, they try to avoid being mixed with something that would lead to reduction of methylene blue, so it gets into the intestines and then does this action.
And that was Dr. Francisco Gonzalez Lima from episode 143.
The fourth nominee is The Use of Dogs and Wolves to Learn How Domestication Affects Intelligence and Self-Sufficiency by Dr. Monique Udell.
The recent studies have been a little bit different. We kind of have taken a step back and said, where do we see these characteristic differences in wolves and dogs crop up? And one of those areas is that dogs, through domestication, are more juvenile in their behavior than wolves. And this can be represented in a number of ways. And one very noteworthy way is the amount of time they spend in close proximity to people or other companions, and the amount of time they spend looking at, or we could even view it as gazing or staring at their companions. If you think about a human child and how they're just always inquisitively looking up to adults and learning. And we see the same kind of thing in dogs. And so a lot of our more recent studies have been asking the question, maybe it's not that dogs are necessarily smarter than wolves. Maybe it's not that they think more like humans, but maybe they just spend much more time watching us, wanting to be in our proximity, learning from us, and responding to our behavior.
And that was Dr. Monique Udell from episode 195.
And for best use of apes, mice, or fruit flies in a supporting role, the winner is
The Use of Mice in Virtual Reality Environments to Learn How Mammal Brains Map Space by Dr. Mayank Mehta. Everyone loves a good book. Books are often where we can find the distillation of the biggest, most important ideas. But the way that the publishing industry works, sometimes ideas that might be perfectly well explained in 20 or 50 solid pages have to get turned into 300-page books, because that's what book publishers demand. And this isn't a commentary on the ideas, just the fit between the ideas and the book medium. But every now and then, a book hits that perfect sweet spot between the size of its ideas, the pages needed to explore them fully, and the particular voice of an inspired author.
For this year's Stephen Jay Gould Scientific Literacy Award, the first nominee is Consciousness and the Social Brain by Dr. Michael Graziano.
One of the biggest problems with previous theories of consciousness, almost all of them, but not quite all of them, is that they're not really theories. And they're not theories because they're not explanatory. One of the key things they don't explain is how we can articulate the fact that we have it. Here's an example. The brain has neurons and synapses and blood flow and all kinds of things in there. That doesn't mean that we can introspect and say, ooh, yep, I got me some neurons today. Just because we have it in there doesn't mean that it's accessible to us to talk about. And almost all theories of consciousness are focused on this question, how do we get it? How does it appear in the brain? But they manage to forget that there's this other side to the question. Just because you have it in there doesn't mean that you can say you have it. So I figure these deep philosophical questions about consciousness are uninteresting to most people until, and this I think is going to happen very soon, until they hit the artificial intelligence scene and they become something that's integral to our society. And suddenly it becomes of such practical significance that people gain intuitions about it. I think what's going to happen is we build this stuff, and suddenly we have computers that are acting like we do. And suddenly we're faced with this realization that we're just machines too. And when we talk to another machine that says, yeah, I'm conscious, and describes it in the same ways we do, and behaves in the same ways we do, and can introspect and report the contents of introspection in the same ways we do, at that point, our natural empathy takes over, and we say to ourselves, yep, it's conscious.
And that was Dr. Michael Graziano from episode 123.
The second nominee is The Driving Force, Food, Evolution, and the Future by Dr. Michael A. Crawford.
Really what went wrong was that during World War II, people were desperately keen to ensure that the fighting force and that the people at home were properly fed, because they knew that, millions of young men would be killed during the war, and they had to replace that stock, breeding stock, so to speak, with good, healthy, strong young people. And so there was a major operation during World War II run by the professor of biochemistry at the University of London to ensure the link between food production, food distribution, nutrition, and health. Now, after the war, that was abandoned because people said, the industry at any rate said, what we need is production. And that's where we need more and more and more and more. And that's when it started to go downhill. Then we had research institutes looking into the production of protein and things like that in cereals, production of protein in animals. And there the major concern was protein was important for growth. Now, that then got translated from animals into humans. Now, protein is great for if you want to grow a pig or a cow or a horse or something like that. But it is not the thing that's important for humans. If you take human milk contains the least amount of protein of any large mammal. But the amount of the essential fats that is present in human milk, the energy the mother produces to put that in the milk for the baby, is greater than the energy she puts into all 10 essential amino acids for the protein.
And that was Dr. Michael A. Crawford from episode 51.
The third nominee is Unbroken Brain, a revolutionary new way of understanding addiction by Maya Salovitz.
There's been this idea that there's this addictive personality that makes you incapable of control with any psychoactive substance if you've ever had one type of addiction. And that just is not backed up by research. The other idea of the addictive personality tends to be lying, manipulative, horrible, bad person. And that also is not borne out by the data.
When people talk about, I have an addictive-prone personality, it's oftentimes said almost with a little bit of a wink-wink, nudge-nudge about something that the person actually likes, whereas a true addict, they would like not to be doing the thing they're addicted to, but they feel compelled to, despite the fact it's not really pleasurable at that point.
That's a very important point because the people who do say that with a wink don't understand that addiction requires negative consequences. If you're engaging in compulsive behavior with positive consequences, you should obviously continue that because things are going well. It's interesting because some people who, say, smoke pot every day might consider themselves addicted because they do it every day. But if they're not having negative consequences, if it's not messing with their family life or their career, then that's not addiction. The idea of addicted babies or crack babies has done a tremendous amount of harm because babies that are born exposed to drugs are then stigmatized and seen as little evil people. And when you stigmatize a child like that and you expect nothing of them or expect bad things of them, that's what you tend to get. And there's been research that suggests that if you think a kid is like a crack baby, you will treat the child more punitively. And that will create negative effects that have absolutely nothing to do with the exposure in the womb and everything to do with our horrible way culturally of dealing with addiction.
And that was Maya Salovitz from episode number 154.
The fourth nominee is Your Brain on Food, How Chemicals Control Your Thoughts and Feelings by Dr. Gary Wenk.
We were looking around for an effective drug that would be a nice, safe anti-inflammatory, and we knew that marijuana had anti-inflammatory properties, sort of along the line of Advil and aspirin. And then about the same time, it was discovered that Tylenol is actually converted into a marijuana-like molecule in the body. We never really understood how Tylenol worked, and I'd been trying it, and it was effective. And then we realized, the human body's turning Tylenol into essentially a cannabinoid, which raises interesting questions about whether it should be legal, but too late now. And that's where I got into cannabinoid research. Cannabinoids cross the blood-brain barrier. They're very potent, they're easy to administer, and they're very safe in, the way we can administer them, edibles and vaping and so forth, relatively safe, of course. And it's something, a low dose that somebody could do every day. But, this is an important caveat. What we found is that it's a nice way to get rid of brain inflammation. But this is one of the studies I published a few years ago. The way that marijuana interacts in the brain, those protein receptors are in young brains, they're in middle-aged brains, they're in old brains. So it matters when you're smoking. What we found is that young animals, just like young humans, should not be bathing their brain in marijuana. It's bad. It interferes with normal development and function.
And that was Dr. Gary Wenk from episode 168.
The fifth nominee is Stealing Fire, How Silicon Valley, the Navy SEALs, and Maverick Scientists Are Revolutionizing the Way We Live and Work by Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheel.
This is not the first time in history a group of people have discovered that non-ordinary states of consciousness can impact performance at a deep level. That goes all the way back. And the example we give is a story from ancient Greece. They had the Eleusinian Mysteries. It was a 9-day death and rebirth, state-changing ritual that involved really kind of almost every so-called ecstatic technology you can imagine. They had prayer, they had chanting, they had meditation, they had distance running. I think they had wrestling. Those are flow triggers. And they also had kykeon, which was a potion at the heart of the ritual that modern chemists have sort of tried to backtrace, and we think it is an LSD derivative made from rye ergot fungus, which is the same precursor that Hoffman got LSD from. The point we're trying to make, among other things, is it wasn't just this 9-day ritual where these guys trip balls, but more importantly, what they experienced while tripping, the illuminations, the inspiration, ended up seeding massive amounts of Western culture. A lot of Plato's philosophy came out of the Eleusinian Mysteries. A lot of Pythagorean's early mathematics. So way back in time, we see people accessing these non-ordinary states, tapping into a heightened level of information, inspiration, insight, intuition, creative problem solving, take your pick, and coming back and using that to seed culture. That happens throughout history. Usually, the party gets out of hand and it blows itself up. And our argument is, hey, that's happening now at a bigger level than we've ever seen it. And there's a reason we might just get it right this time.
And that was author Stephen Kotler from episode 171.
And for the Stephen Jay Gould Scientific Literacy Award, the winner is...
The envelope, please. Consciousness and the Social Brain by Dr. Michael Graziano. Science is all about learning things, and sometimes, very rarely, this happens in a vacuum. We learn something new that we had no context for previously, with no preconceived notions to disrupt or fly in the face of. Other times, researchers need to deal not just with the hard work of drawing more data out from the universe, but also factor in the friction of fighting established beliefs and precedent. This is not always an easy task, and with each publication, a researcher is making a gamble with prestige, popularity, and even perceived legitimacy hanging in the balance. But you can't get a breakthrough without something being broken through.
The nominees for this year's award for the best overturning of the conventional apple cart are The Benefits to Creativity Resulting from Cognitive Fatigue by Marika Wheat.
Don't try to force creativity. That's kind of the worst thing for creativity. You just kind of want to follow your thoughts. And if you're really focused on something, that's probably not going to be very helpful. There's actually a study out there. They looked at alcohol consumption, and being a little bit inebriated actually helps with creativity as well. And it's the same idea, because your thoughts kind of become a little bit more less focused. They kind of float around a little bit more. There's this big secret that no one in this literature really talks about. And these are the neutral people. You're not really a super morning person, and you're not really a super late person. You're just kind of an in-between person. And the interesting thing about neutral individuals is they have a little bit of a bump, as in a cognitive bump, where their thinking processes are much more focused during the morning time, and then they have a little bit of a bump in the evening time. Unlike the morning people, they have a large bump in their ability to focus and concentrate in the morning. The evening people have a large bump in the evening. Those neutral people have too little bumps. So I always tell people, don't force creativity. Try to just kind of let your mind wander. During your not optimal time of day, that's the best way to do it.
And that was Dr. Marika Wheat from episode number 91.
The second nominee is The Psychological Effects of Semen Exposure by Dr. Gordon Gallup.
We got into the literature and began looking at what was known about semen and semen chemistry, and it turns out that 95%, roughly, of the ejaculate consists of what's called seminal plasma. Only 5% of the ejaculate contains sperm. And if you extract the sperm, you're left with seminal plasma. And it's a very complicated concoction of biochemicals and hormones and all kinds of different things. And it turns out that within an hour or two after unprotected sex, you can detect elevated levels of some of these seminal chemicals in a woman's bloodstream. Now, I don't want to leave you with the impression that the antidepressant properties of semen are huge. It's a statistical effect. And I think the effect is more pronounced for some people than for others. We've had a number of people contact us with different kinds of semen testimonials from females who have switched from condoms to unprotected sex. And some of them experience dramatic changes and dramatic antidepressant effects.
And that was Dr. Gordon Gallup from episode number 93.
The third nominee is The Replication Failures of Many Social Science Experiments by Dr. Rolf Zwan.
There's a whole movement now spearheaded by Chris Chambers. He's an advocate of pre-registration, where you as a researcher pre-register your experiment. You provide all the details about how many subjects you're going to run, what procedures you're going to use, how you're going to analyze the data, and what your hypotheses are, and so on. And then that proposal gets reviewed, and if it's accepted by the journal, your manuscript will be published after data collection, of course. What that means is that the research is being evaluated based on the design of the study and the interestingness of the question and so on, and not based on the results. We do it now for all our studies that I do with my collaborators. We design the experiment and determine the sample size and so on, and then put a pre-registration on the open science framework, and then we collect the data. So that means that we have in writing what we said we would do before we did it. What happens in other cases is that people will say, okay, yeah, I plan to run 60 subjects, but look, the effect is already significant with 40, so I'll stop. And that's actually not appropriate.
And that was Dr. Rolf Zwan from episode number 186.
The fourth nominee is The Pleasure Dividend from Novel Perceptual Stimuli by Dr. Irving Biederman.
The vast tracts of the brain dedicated to vision are giving us this rich interpretation of the world. So the monkey, which does have a large proportion of its cortex also dedicated to vision, differs from us in that first part of vision, getting a clear image and its sensitivity to, let's say, the orientation of a line or the size of a line or some stimulus is indistinguishable from human data. It would be hard to know from very simple tasks whether one is looking at a monkey or a human, other than the fact that the monkey has faster reaction times because they have shorter axons. But the monkey, for the most part, lives in the here and now. It sees a piece of fruit, an attractive female, and that's it. For us, for humans, so much of our understanding of the world is not something that occurs in the immediacy of the scene. It's what we bring to it in terms of our prior learning and understanding. And that's where we have these gigantic areas in the anterior temporal lobes that give us our whole world, what we've learned about the world and the interpretation. So when we look at a scene, we bring so much to bear about what it means. And that's how we differ from so many other animals. So that's the part that is loaded with these opioid receptors. They guide us into coming up with these interpretations.
And that was Dr. Irving Biederman from episode number 188.
And for Best Overturning of the Conventional Apple Cart, the winner is...
The envelope, please. The Replication Failures of Many Social Science Experiments by Dr. Rolf Zwan. Okay, so that was it for the first 4 Cognito Awards. As mentioned, there will be 11 in total, so a lot of great stuff still coming up. The plan is that to actually release 2 episodes over the course of the next week, so we're jamming an extra Smart Drug Smarts episode into the schedule. Soon you'll be hearing the winners of awards like the Best Performance by a Synthetic Compound and the Best Endogenous Cognitive Performance Hack. So lots more still to come in the 2017 Cognito Awards. Thank you for tuning in. You can find the links to everything that we talked about here online up at smartdrugsmarts.com/200, including links to all the past episodes, all the nominees, and a listing of the awards still to be given so you can get yourself all excited. I will see you back here on just a couple of days, so keep your RSS feed primed. And of course, it probably goes without saying by now, stay smart.
You've been listening to the Smart Drug Smarts podcast. Visit us online at www.smartdrugsmarts.com and subscribe to our mailing list to keep your neurons buzzing with the latest in brain optimization. The 2017 Cognito Awards have been brought to you by Axon Labs, Vitamunk, and the team behind Smart Drug Smarts. And yes, in case you're wondering, all rights reserved. But drop us an email and we'll see what we can do.